Unmute. Well, again, it's very good to see all of you this morning. Very appreciative of you taking the time out to come and be involved in our Bible class hour. We are in John 12. This is after the death of Lazarus, his resurrection. Jesus has left Bethany, but now as we're moving closer to the time of Passover and that feast and the preparation for it, Jesus is having to make his way back in to Jerusalem. But before he does that, he goes back to Bethany, spends time with his family. We'll be able to move quickly through about verses 11 or so, just because we dealt with it in our sermon last week. But verse 1, then Jesus 6 days before the Passover came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, which had been dead, whom he raised from the dead. There they made him a supper. Martha served, but Lazarus was one of them that sat at the table with him. Then took Mary a pound of ointment of spikenard, very costly, and anointed the feet of Jesus, and wiped his feet with her hair. The house was filled with the odor of the ointment. We've left Bethany, but now we're coming back. And here we have the second recording about Lazarus' death. And the reason why that is important is just to solidify that, okay, this really happened. This isn't just something that we're making up, and even as we go through John 12, we're going to find even more wording being used to the significance of this voice, or to this verse, and to this event, and to the reality and the fact that, okay, this really did happen. And as we discussed, this is going to be the final straw that pushes the Pharisees and the Sadducees over the edge. That we have with Lazarus. Okay, he is a living miracle of who Jesus is. And we have this discussion here, the situation going on with Mary and Martha, and how it is that Mary is going to be involved in performing a beautiful work on the Son of God that we've already discussed in our sermon. But we want to spend a little bit more time, we'll dive into it a little bit, but we're going to take some more time to focus in here on Judas as well. And dealing what we discussed at the end of chapter 11 on how it is that once again in this chapter we are dealing with a study of contrast. On one hand, we have a perfect illustration of true discipleship. The kind of disciple, the kind of servant, and as we move into the New Testament, the kind of Christian that Jesus is looking for. And then we have the picture of Judas. He's a disciple, an apostle, a follower, but he's not of the right caliber. And he's not of the right character. And that we have being said of him, then saith one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, which should betray him, why was not this ointment sold for 300 pence given to the poor? This he said, not that he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief, and had the bag, and bare what was put therein. Then said Jesus, let her alone. Against the day of my burying hath she kept this. For the poor always ye have with you, but me ye have not always. So here's the two groups again that we've been studying this whole entire time. There are those who will follow, and then there are those that are not going to follow. And they're here again illustrated. But it's illustrated in a more severe and pertinent way, because before we're looking at the Pharisees. We're looking at the multitudes of the people. And those are people that are outside, not all that close to Jesus. But here are people that are extremely close to the Lord. A dedicated servant, and then one of the apostles. And it's testing time. What about the loyalty of the disciples themselves? Where do their loyalties lie? And then we have to ask ourselves the similar question. Where do our loyalties lie? Will they follow him, or will they end up following others? And here's what we have with Mary. Mary is an example of deep loyalty. But it's a different kind of loyalty because it's loyalty that is motivated by love. And that's what's supposed to be the driving force for all of us. And that's why it's placed here at this time, in this situation, right before the crucifixion, right before the Last Supper that they're going to enjoy, and right before Jesus has to wash everybody's feet. And when we're thinking about this from the standpoint of not just focusing on Mary, but then also focusing in on Jesus at this time, that here's what Mary has done, and she's done it for this very specific reason, and what that must have meant to Jesus. Because as Jesus is going through this time of crisis, He is here to help mankind. Everything He's doing is for the benefit of others, for their sake. He's worried about and thinking about others, coming here to redeem man from sin, and His very own people, His very own nation has turned against Him, and they are determined that they're going to kill Him. And while Jesus is busy thinking about everybody else, here comes Mary, and she's thinking about Him. She washes His feet with costly perfume, ointment. Anyone have notes on how much it would have costed?
A year's worth of wages.
This is a year's wages. It's an annual salary. With the older commentaries that I have, where our dollar used to actually be worth something, it would have been in the tens of thousands of dollars. And as we're going to discuss here in just a moment, she's not worried about pouring it all out. What you got, Jamie? Oh, sorry. Okay. All right. But then here's the other element of it. When we're thinking about, okay, she's taking something that is extremely valuable, could have been put to all kinds of different uses. And even what we have being described of the event in pouring it out, it is said that the odor filled the house. Well, I'm sure most of you ladies know that when it comes to perfume and different things, your essential oils, how many drops does it take before you're able to smell that stuff? All it really takes is one drop.
Lavender.
And you can't get away from it. But she's pouring everything out. When we're looking at this illustration, no one had to push her or prod her or pressure her to do this good thing. You don't have Martha or anybody else in the house, well, you know, Mary, you got this good ointment. Go and anoint His feet, anoint His head. And nobody's having to repetitively go through that with her where she's just finally, okay, fine, I'm going to do it just so you'll shut up about it. That's not happening here. This is a spontaneous act of love. Mary planned it herself. And just the realization, okay, this is what I have. This is what I can offer. This is what I can give. And in view of what it is that Jesus has already given to her that we discussed in our sermon, here is my brother. He was dead and buried in the tomb for 4 days, but yet now here He is alive and He's eating this Passover with us. What a wonderful gift. We see the spontaneity of it. We see the devotion of it. And that she didn't worry about the cost. She didn't worry about the cost. She didn't worry about the amount. The text tells us that she broke it. Why include that detail? Well, I've already touched on it, but just to make sure that we're all on the same plane here. Why make mention of the fact that she broke it?
Well, she was determined to use it all.
Okay. She didn't just pull the stopper out of it and pour a little bit and then save some for later. She gave it all. And from this, Jesus commended her and even defended her from his own apostles. And that we have this being also an illustration of that undivided love, with the idea of pouring it all out. I'm not putting some here, putting some there, and trying to store some of this over here for myself. It is a complete giving out. What kind of servants are we supposed to be? It's the same type of level that we're talking about here. Of our own desires, of what it is that we have, full devotion, undivided. We are giving our all. And that John puts Mary here as a sign of the kind of discipleship that Jesus has been trying to produce the whole entire time. And it's what he's still trying to create. It's the kind of discipleship that he wants from us. But there's another point. But anybody have any thoughts, comments on this before we... Okay, go ahead.
Just as, when we're reading the chronological Bible and we're, gathering up all of the other pieces of the puzzle, Jesus is also, and we all know this and we're going to come across this, James and John are talking about, can we sit on your right hand and all of this, and even their mother comes to Jesus in illustration of who's the greatest servant and, where their focus is. And we still come back to Mary.
Yep.
And just focus on what her focus was.
And that's a good connection to make, because it's not just a Judas problem as we're going through this. Judas starts the problem and it spreads to the other apostles. But even in the midst of all of this, as Jamie said, James and John, who's going to sit on your right hand, who's going to sit on your left hand. And as we move forward to the washing of the feet, they're still arguing about who's going to be the greatest. Well, you think that they would learn their lesson by the fact that Jesus points this out and says, look at this. And then to have him end up saying about it, it's going to be recorded and it's going to remain in the gospel record as long as the earth stands. The,
Another thought that Mary was so thankful to have her beloved brother back. She realized that it was Jesus' responsibility for this, and so she was just so thankful for him. Back and sacrifice and everything.
say it again.
Mary was so thankful to have her brother back, because most people would do anything to have their beloved person back, that she was willing to sacrifice.
Are you catching it in the back? Okay. No, we got one yes, one no. You're going to have to raise your level.
Mary was so thankful to have her brother back, because most people would do anything to have their beloved person, family member back, that she was willing to sacrifice so much. And the fact that she realized, that it was Jesus who made this all happen, she was thankful and willing to do anything for him.
And so a thankful heart is a giving heart. But as we discussed before, if you're going to be thankful, you're going to have to be thinking. You're going to have to be a rememberer. And so that's the driving point of why we're doing the things that we're doing. Why are you here today? Obligation? Well, I'm supposed to be. That's there. But it's not. It shouldn't be the driving force. Go ahead. Look at what God's given to us. What we've been blessed with. All right. I will sacrifice some sleep so as to be here. And especially with our visitors coming from Columbia Falls. That's no little trip. But why? Well, we just got to be there. And if we're not, then this, that, and the other. It's like Carla was saying, it's like we're saying about Mary. It's thankfulness. But then we also have within this, when we're thinking about what this is supposed to generate within us as followers of Jesus. Here's a teaching moment that Jesus is taking, and this is what it's designed to do. So we also have a lesson for teachers, preachers, but also the students. The purpose of preaching and teaching is not to nag or pressure people to do things. And I'm including the students in here because a lot of the times that's how they want to try to interpret what the preacher is trying to do in dealing with certain topics. Well, you're just trying to nag us and try to get us to do this, that, and the other. It's not what I'm trying to do. We are trying to lead people to follow Christ's example, to learn about His love, and to create within us the same kind of loving loyalty that Mary has right here. And if we can do that, then we will not have to push people or guilt people to doing things that God says that we're supposed to do. It'll just get done. Yes, ma'am.
So with that being said, that's the goal of you as the preacher. And as you said, we as the students who are listening, we also have the obligation to have the pure heart that it takes to receive the word and to have the right attitude, regardless of what we hear.
To be able to examine yourself.
Yes.
Absolutely. And if we can produce that kind of that kind of mindset with the followers, with the Christians, then people will be pushing the preacher or the eldership out of their way to do whatever they can do for the sake of the kingdom. And this is what Mary was picking up as she was sitting at Jesus' feet and watching Him do His work back in Luke chapter 10. That wasn't a waste on Mary. For her to be there sitting, listening, and knowing the kind of things that Jesus was out there doing for not just her, but for everybody. And then when the chance arose for her to do something back, not even a thought. And so when we think about just all the different things that we're trying to fix, problems that we're trying to fix throughout the brotherhood, there's a huge problem with attendance. The Sunday morning crowd, and especially at the worship assembly hour, 11 a.m., that is not attended like the Bible class hour is, or the Sunday evening is, or even the Wednesday evening is. And that you'll have preachers and different ones get up there and they'll poke and they'll prod and they'll preach on, you need to attend, you need to be here. But that's a symptom of something else. That's a symptom of a bigger problem. It's a heart problem. If your loyalty and your devotion is where it needs to be, I don't have to prod you to get here. You'll be here. Comes to the issue of modesty. That's a symptom of another problem. It's a heart problem. It's a loyalty problem. It's a devotion problem. Well, here's how God says that we're supposed to be. Well, I'm not going to do that. Because here's what I want to do. It's a desire that people serve, but that people serve of a pure motivation. And Jesus is going to show further in this chapter, which we're going to discuss in our sermon, how this kind of life of sacrifice pays back in dividends. Okay, I'm giving up what I want or even what I have. Okay, you're going to be rewarded for that. But if you're not going to live that way, if you're not going to live like a Mary, but instead you're going to end up living like a Judas, who is selfish, covetous, materialistic, not interested in giving to or really serving Christ or others. But Judas is purely concerned about what he can get from Christ and not from following Him. And there are plenty of people like Judas still in the church today. Yes, sir.
Obviously it's easy to ascribe those ideas to Judas because we see what he ends up doing.
Yeah.
But the thing of it is, it's an idea that's common to man. It's common. If any of us are saying that we've never had those types of feelings or temptations, I would assume that we are strongly lying. I mean, you look at the apostles, how many times that they came up with ideas that were just completely foreign to a Christ-like mindset.
Yeah.
And were completely of a flesh mindset. You think the times they say, well, who's the greatest?
Yep.
Around here, you have the times they just come up with weird ideas like, well, let's build a tabernacle to this guy, and you. And he's like, you still don't get it.
Yep.
And so we're always focusing on things that are often just selfish.
Yeah.
And so it's a constant something that we're having to work on. Just because Judas ended up doing what he's doing does not mean that we sometimes do not reflect some of the character flaws of Judas.
Yeah. We get into a mode of thinking, oh, well, that's him, and he's so terrible, and I would never do anything like that. And if we do that, we're setting ourselves up for a big fall.
Peter ever thought he was going to do something?
Absolutely. Yeah, in just a few short chapters. Well, we know that he didn't think that because he's already said, Lord, I'll die with you.
Yeah.
And then when that time actually comes, he's running away with everybody else and denying him 3 times. So yeah, absolutely. And so as we've gone through our classes, as Miles, okay, as what Miles is presenting, this is full of application for the church. This isn't just something that we're reading and studying so as to fill our time and to, well, okay, we know what this chapter says, and yes, this happened way back here. This is about us. And that we have to glean from this. We have to reap from this as much as we possibly can. So anything else?
I think for John to be so bold and to say that Jesus was a thief,
Mm-hmm.
he must have seen those characteristics in him for him to go ahead and make that bold statement.
So that goes back to the conversation we were having. I don't necessarily know how much insight they actually had, because we know that John is writing this from the phase of looking backwards. And so, possibly, very possible that, okay, everybody's watching, and it's one of those things, it's kind of like the meme that is going around, if I ever win the lottery, I don't have to tell anybody, there'll be signs. Mm-hmm. And you see all these extravagant things that people are buying. You have to wonder if that's not going along with Judas too. And that's just, okay, where are you getting some of this stuff? Possibly. Or even just the fact of so we know how Jesus' mind is. Judas is not the only one that's going to, even though he had the bag, we know Jesus is sending individuals out 2 by 2 for the sake of making sure things are honest and plain. There'd be somebody else involved, more than likely, that's going to be recognizing, you would hope, okay, something's going missing here. This isn't, the books aren't lining up. I don't really know. Yes, sir.
It's interesting kind of to think about the big picture, though, because I don't think any of the apostles really got it until
Right.
Acts 2.
Right.
And so, I mean, even Jesus dies and all this other stuff, I think you can look through the text, and especially Peter, I mean, he's still thinking, we're going to have a kingdom here on earth. I mean, up until the day that Christ dies, and I think when he says, I won't deny him,
Right.
I think in many ways, I mean, I'm not going to deny you. I'm going to get my sword out and I'm going to fight.
Right.
We're going to bring this thing into fruition.
Yep.
And then when he finds out, well, that's not what's happening, he then denies it,
Yep.
right? Because that's not the way he envisioned all this happening. That's not what he wanted. That's not what Peter wanted.
Yeah.
Maybe what Christ wanted, but it wasn't what Peter wanted. If Christ dies and Peter goes fishing, you have all these other things. And so I think in many ways, all of them were kind of all over the place. Obviously, none of them went to the extent that Judas did.
Yep.
But there was still so much teaching that had to be wrapped up together for all of them to truly get it.
Yep.
I think.
Well, especially, so even in this chapter in John 12, down about verses 27, 28, when the Gentiles show up and they're wanting to see Jesus, and Jesus breaks out that conversation with them, John ends up recording, okay, what he was speaking about, they did not understand until they remembered what had happened after his glorification. So yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right that the apostles, even at this late stage, they are all over the place. So, but it goes to show, but even right there is even an illustration of what we're dealing with. How scatterbrained do we get when it comes to everything that we have going on in our daily lives? And then how easy it is to lose focus, lose the attention on what it is that's being laid out for us. All kinds of application here.
And how much planning do we as Americans do? And everything's got to be this way, and we've got to be here at this point in our lives, and we're going to be at this goal and that goal, and then it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Our plans don't work out. You
Yeah.
know? And then a lot of times we spiral into madness or anger or bitterness or depression.
Yeah.
It's like, well, maybe that's not what God had in store for you. Obviously, it didn't happen.
Right.
I mean,
And that's the whole scenario of Matthew 6, about worrying about tomorrow. Just deal with today. And in dealing with today, tomorrow will take care of itself. So yeah, anything else? Okay. All right, so looking at Judas, here he is with Jesus, and he's simply there for what he can gain physically. So like we said, this isn't just a Judas problem. He is exactly like those people in John 6, following Jesus for the bread. You're not following me for my word, for my teaching. You're just following me for the food. Judas wanted money. And Judas knows at this point the rulers want to get rid of Jesus. They've made a public announcement. They did that in the last chapter. Anybody that knows where he is, come and tell us, and we're going to take him. Now you just think about this situation and how that plays into what Judas ends up doing in betraying Jesus. Here's Judas. He holds the bag. He's a thief. And he's just lost an opportunity on getting paid. 300 pence out the window. That's no longer going into the bag. Okay, he'll find another way to get paid. And that will be turning his back on Jesus. He will sell out the Savior for 30 pieces of silver. So it's very likely that, just as we're saying about Mary, that as Mary realized, okay, Jesus' time was coming to a close. Jesus says, she's doing this for my burying. Judas saw the same thing. He saw the writing on the wall. okay, my cash cow is about to be slaughtered. I better get while the getting's good. He's going to get one more payday out of the Lord, and completely missing what it is that Christ is actually there to offer. You have people still doing that with religion today. Why are they? Go ahead.
In regard to what you just said, if the disciples are still thinking, hey, we're going to have this earthly kingdom and David and you're the new David, blah, 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 and it's not going to happen, it makes sense if his mind is set on thievery.
Yep. But then, from looking at Mary and then looking at Judas, we have another contrast, another illustration of character in verse 9. Much people of the Jews, therefore, knew that he was there, and they came not for Jesus' sake only, but that they might see Lazarus also, whom he had raised from the dead. But the chief priests consulted that they might put Lazarus also to death, because that by reason of him many of the Jews went away and believed on Jesus. So remember what they said in the secret council. If anyone knows where he is, come and tell us so that we can take him. And then they're sitting around contemplating, well, will he come back to Jerusalem for the feast or won't he? But just look at this. It's no secret where Jesus is. Everybody knows where he is. Why don't you go and take him? Because they're cowards. No. We're not going to take him where everybody can see us doing it, where he has an audience, where he has witnesses. They're going to take him. They're not going to take him while he has the support of the people. They will wait till the people are distracted. It's Passover time. We've got this feast going on. We've got all these things that we've got to be busy with. And then they're going to come and take him in secret. In the middle of the night. When darkness is able to conceal them. Does it need to formulate?
Well, the only comment I have to say is not biblical. It's just like, well, that's what goes on right now. Let's create all this busyness while we steal people's rights or whatever in the government. You know,
Yep.
It still goes on.
Yep. Same methods, same toolbox. But then you also have, as I have it here underlined and bracketed, here they are, and they're not just coming to see Jesus, but that they might see Lazarus also. People will not just be looking to Jesus or his word for evidence of truth. They will also be looking at us. They will be watching and studying our lives and our character to scrutinize and to determine, well, what's actually right. There's a pretty popular phrase going around. You saw it on everybody's marquees. You might be the only Bible that anybody reads. There's truth to that. People are going to watch you and examine you, and especially as public as we are, with what it is that we believe and what we teach and how we're supposed to live. They are going to be examining you thoroughly. Are you going to uphold that? Now, on one hand, I can understand why that's a bit unfair. Because at the end of the day, we're all human. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to fall short. And we're going to sin. But that's just the nature, that's just the way things are if we're wanting to be Christians. This is what we're signing up for. You are the light. You are a city on a hill. You are something for people to watch and examine. And so it goes back into the sermons that Jordan did about leadership and how being a good leader is just simply somebody that has influence over somebody else. Comes back to the question of what kind of influence are you going to have?
I don't think it has to be much of a fearful thing. You know, I think we always fear failure of
Yep.
any kind, even if it's not of a moral nature
Yep.
in general. It's scary and we don't like it. But I think a lot of times you have the biggest impact when you do make a mistake or a failure, and then you have the opportunity to show how you can handle that.
Yep.
I know I've learned far more by older men in the church who explain things they've done wrong in their marriage, in their interaction with their kids, and things like that. And the ability to have those conversations has trained my heart a lot more than someone, you know, anybody else.
Yep.
I mean, by being candid about that, you can really change hearts and show people, you know, what it's like living life.
Yeah. And so with a lot of our studies, we've gone through and discussed that, how it is they're more of Christian characteristics and illustrations of the gospel are able to be gained, illustrated, and learned by the struggles and by the mistakes that you make. So like the whole Matthew 5, blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Well, how do you receive mercy? You got to make a mistake. You got to do something wrong. So in doing wrong, I've sinned, but yet grace and mercy was applied. I'm going to be ready to give that to somebody else. Go ahead, Reese.
It just shows that when you're able to admit your wrongs or anything like that, it shows the maturing Christian that you're becoming or that you are, and then that's what sets you up for being a good leader, is the being able to admit that I was wrong in these situations and taking that on, but not having that be your, it's not personality, yeah, it is personality, but being that person that I did wrong and, you know, holding that with you, taking that with you through the years. It's, no, I did wrong, I got over it, and now we're here. Like, you're moving forward with your life, and you're not bringing those old things with you in the sense of where it brings everyone down. It's to uplift other people, and it's to show that, hey, I've done wrong in my past, and we can learn from these mistakes, and you just move forward.
It's what Jordan Peterson writes about in his 12 Rules of Life. Don't be a lobster. Because a lobster that's defeated in going up against a bigger male for mating rights and all these different kind of things, that lobster that's defeated goes around, isolates himself, and ultimately just ends up dying because of his defeat. Now we look at that and say, okay, that's what this dumb animal does. Humans do that too. We do not allow ourselves to look at our failures and just, all right, there's something to learn from this. Here's something to overcome. Here's an area to be able to grow. Seeing that with the apostles. See it all throughout with these people striving to gain what it is that Christ is laying out before them.
It's really encouraging to me by reading the letters of Paul, where he explains in a very encouraging way. Obviously, his intent is to uplift the congregation, but what an awful person he was. And it's interesting because, you know, a lot of times the secular world, especially the psychologists at the big universities, give Paul a lot of criticism.
Right.
He's an egotistical, narcissistic maniac.
Yeah.
And if you read some of his, you know, you take a chapter or something, maybe you could get that idea. But an egotistical, narcissistic maniac also doesn't write some of the most candid things in the world
Right.
about the worst places he's ever been.
Yeah.
And some of those writings, man, if he can sit here and stomach this about himself,
Yeah.
what am I complaining about? Why am I sitting in a rut right now?
Yeah.
You know, like, I got to get over this.
But then also not allowing that to keep him from pointing out the faults of others.
Right.
Well, who am I to look at this other person, consider what I've done? You are the perfect person because you've made just as many mistakes, if not more, to be able to say, hey, I get it. and that there's hope. So yeah. So here we have these Jews coming to see Lazarus, but then there's even an opposite to this. 10 and 11, the chief priests consulted they might put Lazarus also to death, because that by reason of him many of the Jews went away and believed on Jesus. Here's a man that's raised from the dead after 4 days. They knew this. They even admit it publicly, that this is a miracle. But in spite of that evidence, they would not convert. And here is an important point for us as we're thinking about this from the standpoint of trying to go out, evangelize, and to take the gospel message out to those that are lost. All the evidence in the world still will not convert some people.
Say it again.
All the evidence in the world still will not convert some people.
If their heart is not in the right spot.
If their heart is not in the right place.
Doesn't matter how we say it.
Nope. And that because their faith is not like Mary's. And we've discussed all the different avenues, all the different reasons why this is the case with the Pharisees and the Sadducees. They have pride, they have position, they have material wealth, they have influence of the people, they have connections politically. They have everything to lose. And they even admit that in their secret meeting. Well, if we don't do something, we are going to lose our place. Well, that may be true, but what do you have to gain? And that goes back to what Jesus discussed in Matthew about what shall a man gain if he gain the entire world and lose his soul? And that's going to come up again in this chapter. So then verse 12. On the next day, much people that were come to the feast, when they heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem, took branches of palm trees, went forth to meet him, and cried, Hosanna, blessed is the King of Israel, that cometh in the name of the Lord. And Jesus, when he had found a young ass, sat thereon, as it is written, Fear not, daughter of Zion, behold, thy King cometh, sitting on an ass's colt. Here is the people's way of confessing to the Messiah. And we need to visualize this scene. This is fulfillment. Psalm 118, 25 and 26, Zechariah 9, 9. But the way that John records this gives us better insight for the reason for the excitement. Because John records Jesus' triumphant entry into Jerusalem, and the raising of Lazarus was before this. Now can we better understand the excitement of what's going on? Why the people would react as they did? Why they would shout and sing and praise the Messiah? But even with this crowd, Jesus is going to end up disappointing every one of them also. Now, just to think about this scene, how that there would be anywhere from 2 million to 3 million Jews at Jerusalem at this time. And here they all are in anticipation of the Messiah coming. And here they are even publicly announcing the Messiah is here. But John records a problem in all of this, of what they're saying, what they're witnessing, what the apostles are witnessing, and it's verse 16. These things understood not his disciples at the first. So to the point that Miles brought up a while ago, here they are and they still are not getting it. And that word understood is the idea of comprehending, piecing these things together, making it all fit like it's supposed to. They did not understand the kind of Messiah that he is. Majority of them, they are waiting for a king like David to restore them back to that physical kingdom. That's not what Jesus was riding into Jerusalem to do. He was entering Jerusalem to fix the problem of sin. And it's not until his resurrection and his ascension that they remembered and that they understood. But when Jesus was glorified, then remembered they that these things were written of him and that they had done these things unto him. In the moment they missed it. But once these things end up getting fulfilled, then they get it. And people are still misunderstanding this point. As we're alive here today, almost 2,000 years removed, and people are still waiting for that Messiah to come physically to this earth and to establish an earthly kingdom. What is it that they're missing? What are they not understanding? What they're not understanding is that this event, as John records it here, and as Matthew records it, is the fulfillment of those Old Testament prophecies. We're not looking for this to happen. John and Matthew both say this is that event. So when a prophecy is fulfilled, what do you do with that prophecy?
Throw it away.
You set it to the side. It's done. It's completed. It's finished. But yet people are still waiting for this to be done. They're in the same boat with the disciples. They're just not getting it. But once again, we're being shown that Jesus knew what his purpose was. He knew that his purpose was to come into the world and to be sacrificed. And he's going to mention that again when he starts talking to these Greeks, to these Gentiles. And that's what John the Immerser announced in John 1:29. Behold, the Lamb of God, which taketh away the sin of the world. Then verse 17. The people therefore that was with him when he called Lazarus out of his grave and raised him from the dead bear record. That's a powerful point. Of everything that's happening here, this is public testimony that the people in general acknowledge Jesus as the fulfillment at that time. Not only do you have the people in Israel saying these things, but even the people that were there to see Lazarus raised from the dead, they're involved in this. But again, what's also powerful about this is that you even have the enemies, the opposition. And what are they even about to announce amongst themselves? What are they fixing to bear record of? The same thing. For this cause the people also met him, for that they heard that he had done this miracle. So it's not possible for the Jews today to be able to say, well, he's not the one. And that's what they all are still promoting. We're still waiting for the Messiah to come. No. We have Jewish record at this time of your ancestors admitting and acknowledging this happened. He's the guy. The people at that day recognized it. But then again, we find the reaction of the jealous and prideful Pharisees. But even in their jealousy and their arrogance, notice what they admit. Verse 19, the Pharisees therefore said among themselves, perceive ye how ye prevail nothing? Behold, the world is gone after him. All that excitement. And I believe in Matthew's account, it mentions on how the city was in an uproar. stirred, and that's that's connected to the idea of when Jesus is crucified, and that it's not connected to the idea. It's the same wording that's used at Jesus' crucifixion. It says that the earth shook. That's what's going on at Jerusalem at this point, and the Pharisees are noticing, and they're saying, okay, we're not doing anything here. The entire world has gone after him. All this excitement, man, things are really getting out of hand. These folks have just gone plumb wild. Calling him the Messiah, laying down these palm branches. What are we going to do? You know what you have to do in a situation like that. It's too big. So again, it pushes their hand. But then we have John recording another event leading up to the crucifixion, and it's an important event to get us to chapter 13. And that's the arrival of these Greeks. There were certain Greeks among them that came up to worship at the feast. The same came therefore to Philip, which was of Bethsaida of Galilee, and desired him, saying, Sir, we would see Jesus. These were Gentiles. The Greek word in verse 20 for the word Greeks is Hellen. They are Hellenistic. But, well, let me ask, what kind of Gentiles are these? What kind of Greeks are these?
Well, I just read recently that the Philistines actually came from Greece.
Okay.
Or no?
Well, let me rephrase it. I'm not really concerned about ethnicity or particular region of Israel that they came from, or Galilee for that matter.
If they're going to worship, would they be proselytes?
Okay. Here are proselytes. Now, as to what level of proselytes, I'm not 100% sure, just because the text doesn't tell us. But the fact that you have the text referring to them as Greeks, normally, when a Gentile becomes proselyted in, and if they're circumcised, they lose their Greek identity. They become an Israelite. So the fact that John still records this section, or this group, as identifying them as Greeks, has me lean to them either being the stranger at the gate or the God-fearer like Cornelius. And that with those two categories, though you could not come fully into the ceremony with the Jews, there were still things that were open to you and possible for you to be able to observe. Like I'm saying, I'm not trying to be dogmatic about it, just throwing out possibilities here, because the text just doesn't tell us. But the fact remains, these are Gentiles, and they're coming to Jerusalem to worship. So that goes back to whatever class it was where Jamie asked the question about what should the Jews be recognizing about the role that Gentiles are going to play in God's plan of redemption. How does he feel about them? Are they just cast out there and they're just left out there and God doesn't really care about them until the Jews end up rejecting Jesus and now we're switching over to the Gentiles? All throughout our studies, I've been trying my best to point out every occasion and every time you have Gentiles interacting with Jesus. And not just the Gentiles, even the Samaritans. and because there's so much misunderstanding about the Gentiles in God's plan of redemption. Now here we are coming towards the end of Christ's life, and we have Greeks, Gentiles showing up. Who was it that showed up at the birth?
Gentiles.
The Magi, the wise men from the east. They saw the star, and they knew to come looking for the king. How did they know that? Coming from a Gentile land. That's one of the beautiful things about the synagogue system. That as Israel was taken captive by foreign nations, spread throughout, all these foreign lands, couldn't go back to their temple, they established the synagogues. And that as you read through Paul's missionary journeys and everywhere that he went, what was there? Synagogues. And as he's going in and out of the synagogues, who do you find there? Jews and
Gentiles.
Gentiles. That's part of God's plan. And that's how those individuals would have known, oh, this is what's happening. And that's why you have these Greeks, these Gentiles, wanting to be a part of this system, and now here they are coming to Jerusalem for this feast, and not just for the feast, but at the bottom of verse 41, we would see Jesus. What's causing these Greeks to do these things? It's God's light through Israel going to the Gentiles. And with their visit, Jesus divulges more information about his death that's about to happen. And how this is going to end up being a major preparation point for the evangelizing of the Gentile world that Paul's going to end up doing. We have them coming and saying, sir, we would see Jesus. All throughout John's study, we've been making this point about these kinds of people that are making similar statements. John 6:24, you have the crowd saying, we are seeking Jesus. John 7:11, they raise the question, where is he? John 1:39-46, the statement is made, come and see. Out of their own interest, they are looking, they are searching, they are wanting to find. And that's what's wrong with most people today. Number one, they do not want to search. They don't want to look. Well, let me Google it and click the first link that pops up.
It's a scam.
Here they are, and they've traveled great distance. But then the other problem in searching and looking is, what are you hoping to find? And that's the discussion from Matthew 11 when it came to John the Immerser. Well, what were you going out there hoping to see? Well, when it comes to Jesus and what he has to offer, what are you hoping to find? Something to fit what you're wanting, or actually wanting to find what God says and what God commands? And what he ends up divulging very quickly, Philip cometh and telleth Andrew, and again Andrew and Philip tell Jesus. Jesus answered them, saying, the hour is come that the Son of Man should be glorified. Now, some possibilities as to the discussion and discourse between Philip and Andrew. Several possibilities here. Could be that they're cautious in what they're about to do and letting these people get close to Jesus, because everybody knows they're planning. Everybody knows that the Jews want to kill him. This could be an assassination attempt. But also, we know about the apostles, they have had a really bad problem of not letting people they deem as being unworthy get too close to Jesus. But once again in verse 23, Jesus knows death is approaching. Up to this point, it's my time is not at hand. My hour is not yet. But now he states it. The hour is here. And he states that at the arrival of the Gentiles. Seeing these Gentiles and in realizing and seeing them as being similar to him. Here they are, the Gentiles, people that have been rejected and pushed to the side. Just like he was. But we have here also the reminder that Jesus was sacrificing himself for them also. Jesus did not come to save the Jews only. But we have been laid out for us what it is going to take, what it might take to help others. The cost to save the world, the whole world from sin. Jesus had to lay down his life. And then Jesus gives us some points that we're going to study in our sermon. Verily, verily, I say unto you, except a corn of wheat fall into the ground and die, it abideth alone. But if it die, it bringeth forth much fruit. And then to have Paul use this same illustration, though in a different context, to lay out the same point. 1 Corinthians 15:35. But some man will say, how are the dead raised up, and with what body do they come? Thou fool, that which thou sowest is not quickened, except it die. First Corinthians 15 is in connection to that final resurrection. But what Jesus is dealing with in John chapter 12 is that resurrection that takes place in the here and now when we die to sin. And then what Jesus is laying out is an illustration once again. He's preaching to them. You want to be a dedicated disciple? You want to be a great servant? This is what it takes. But like I said, we'll deal with that more in our sermon. But any comments or questions as we close here on verse 24? All right. Then we'll stop.